Hi there, I'm Dr. Jennifer Jackson. I'm a registered nurse and assistant professor in the Faculty of Nursing at the University of Calgary. And this video is on how to analyze qualitative data. So I'm going to talk a bit about how to analyze qualitative data conceptually, like what you do with those data and how you think about them. And I'm going to show a little bit in vivo, but the process is the same, whether you're using any kind of software or post-it notes or highlighters or anything. This is not sponsored. It just happens to be the software I have on my computer at this point in time. So I'm going to make the assumption that you know what qualitative research is and you're familiar, at least at a high level, with different kinds of qualitative research. And if not, there's another video I have that gives an introduction into qualitative research. So when we're doing qualitative analysis, a lot of the available resources talk about it with things like themes emerged or you know it when you see it or you feel it when you get it right. And it generally makes it sound kind of like witchcraft, which, to be honest, it is a little bit because you can genuinely feel in your body when you get it right. But I would say it's probably not dissimilar from how you would feel in your body if you got really exciting statistical findings as well. So I think it's still a very rigorous process, and what I'm going to try and do is like illustrate a little bit more, because many textbooks write it as you sort of stare at your interview text for 6 weeks and then hopefully think some big thoughts about it, but there's more to it than that. So with qualitative research, we know quantitative, the work you preload, because you have to get the code ready and identify the analyses and structure all the variables and make sure your survey's set up okay and pilot it and all of these things. But then you run the analysis and it spits out your numbers and you interpret them. With qualitative research, you afterload, if you will, because you do the interviews and then you have to spend time with those data after the fact, and doing that analysis, that's where it's heavy. So they can be intense at different points in time. And so what you want to do with qualitative data fundamentally is identify patterns. And it doesn't matter what method it is, you are looking to identify patterns. And generally, again, regardless of method, you start with looking at descriptively what the patterns are and move to an interpretive type of lens of the patterns. So you're going to move up Bloom's taxonomy as you go through your analysis. And this is where you are creating the codes that you are going to use as part of your work. So this is intellectually very difficult work. I find it really intense, and I can only do it for about 20-25 minutes at a time, and then I need to have a break. So if you're finding that it's not something you can sit down and do for hours on end, you're probably doing it right, because it is a very, very intense process. I think in part because you have to hold so much in your working memory, as well as managing the conventions of how you conduct that analysis. So fundamentally, you are looking for patterns. Now, if you're doing a brand of phenomenology, you are looking for patterns about someone's experience. If you're doing grounded theory, you're looking for a pattern that illustrates a process. So A happens, then B happens, then C happens. If you're doing ethnography, you're looking for patterns on how culture is created, expressed, and transferred or transmitted to new members of the community. If you are doing framework analysis, you already have some high-level ideas in mind, maybe sensitizing concepts or a theoretical structure. And what you're doing is identifying examples from your data set of where those concepts are illustrated. If you're doing thematic analysis, you're looking for patterns that illustrate the themes of this experience or the way that people interact in the workplace or whatever your topic might be. And like I could go on, but each method has its own focus. So you add that to what you're doing. What I mean by that is chocolate chip cookies have a different recipe than oatmeal cookies. And they're both foundationally cookies. You know, they need butter, sugar, flour, etc. But and they're both like you put them beside each other and they can say that they're both cookies. However, some of the key ingredients that differentiate them are different between the two recipes. So this is actually very analogous to qualitative analysis. You are baking cookies, so you're looking for patterns in data, and those occur, there are lots of different patterns, but to identify which patterns are relevant, you need to think about what method you're using. And so what kind of specific ingredients do you need for that method? So phenomenology, you need to look for experience. So what was this person like before the thing happened? How did they feel while the thing happened? And then how are they different after the fact? What is their new understanding of who they are as a person and a person in context? So those are the kind of patterns you need to look for. Additionally, you want to think about context in terms of what environment exists that creates these patterns or enables these patterns to happen in this way. So for example, context could be in a post-COVID-19 world. People are more sensitized to health information from the government than they were previously, which means that how they interact with advertisements about public health might be different. So you don't want to make generic claims about context, which I've done before I learned better, saying, oh, it's just, you know, it's affected by your gender, person, place, all this kind of thing. A better way to look at context is not maybe every single factor that influences the phenomenon. Instead, you want to look at what factors make this the way it is, that if we took those away, this would be a different story. So like gender might be one. Geographic location might be one. You know, in my city, we have very harsh winters. So the experience of homelessness is different here than it is in, say, Los Angeles, where you can survive outside 365 days a year. So that's an example of how the pattern you're going to see is different based on your contextual factors. So when you are actually analyzing qualitative data, you have to read your transcripts and become very familiar with what the participants talk about and how they discuss different things. Now, there are different nuances here. If you're doing conversation analysis, you have a totally different type of interaction with your transcripts than if you're doing thematic analysis. But as a general approach, what you'll see in the textbook is immerse yourself in the data. So that I find to be a bit nebulous. What it actually means is you need to read the transcripts, and when you do, look for different things. So the first time you read through, or first or second, you are just getting a sense of what are the stories here and what is this participant saying. Over time, you want to reread the transcripts, but you read them for different things. So at first you might look through and say, I need to establish a sequence of events. So your participant probably didn't give you a direct A, B, C, D, E. You're going to have to take the different pieces of the story and build that. Then you might say, okay, now I want to look at turning points. So where in this interview are there turning points? Another time you may reread the same interview and say, I'm going to identify all of the different emotions. So here the participant is recounting how they felt angry at the time. That doesn't mean they were necessarily angry in the interview, but that was the emotion they felt at the time. However, they came to feeling acceptance later on. You might also then reread again and look for like, what is the role of other actors here? So would this experience culture phenomenon exist without the influence of other people? How are other people influential? So when we talk about immerse yourself in the data, in these data, you want to consider the participants, what they have told you, based on different factors. And so go through it with a different lens several times. So look for emotion, look for other actors, look for a sequence of events. That is how you immerse yourself in those data, because then you will start to see different kinds of patterns. Also, you need to think about the fact that you will find many patterns, and what you need to do is code patterns that are relevant for your answering your research question. So when I was doing my PhD, I was coding to look at how nurses understood their work. There was also a pattern about how nursing identity was flexible depending on different types of roles, and how nurses would like recalibrate their identity whenever they went to, say, an administrative role instead of a clinical one. But that pattern did not answer my research question. So what I did was I put that pattern in the like parking garage or the notes page, where I said there's something going on here that I might want to come back to for a paper later, or maybe I want to do some secondary analysis or something else. But that pattern does not answer my research question now. And right now I'm prioritizing the patterns that answer my research question. So you want to, as you go through this analysis, you want to become more focused and be able to discern, okay, this is interesting, but it might not be the pattern I'm looking for. So what pattern is going to answer my research question? So when we look at, I'm going to show, this is from a project we did looking at media reports. So these data that are on the screen are from a newspaper article. It is in the public domain, and no part of this project was directly from participants. This was all based on publicly accessible media reports. So there's no concerns about ethics with me showing you this, because you can Google this and find this online from a local newspaper anytime you wanted. So I'm going to look at one section here. Oasis of crime closed. So this is the piece I'm talking about. So the Safer Communities and Neighborhoods unit of the Sheriff's Office shut down another alleged drug house on Lethbridge's north side. Well, there are several suspected drug houses in Lethbridge. This one on the 300 block of 20th Street North may be a bigger win for the community than most. Confirmed. Lethbridge Police Service downtown, crime unit, constable. Okay, so when we look at this, we can start by saying our first like descriptive codes might be neighborhood. We might look at police, safety. So words like that would form probably the basis. Now, when you are doing analysis, it varies based on method. Some types of analysis you want to code like several words at a time. Most types you want to code, if you're doing your initial interview, you want to code like a sentence or two at the time. So here, shut down an alleged drug house. So I'm gonna code this as whoops. Let's say police action. So the police did a thing. So if I find other examples of the police doing a thing, I'm going to code there. So then new code, drug house. Okay. So then, while there are several suspected drug houses, this one may be a bigger win for the community than most. So we're gonna add that to drug house. Oops, my let's try this again. As you can see, they're very functional undo features in most of your analysis software. So we'll put this in drug house, and then we'll put this piece in drug house as well. So I'm also gonna create a new code for community. So maybe a bigger win for the community than most. Let's put that in community. We can also say safety. So this is off to a good start. We've got a few descriptive codes, but we can see that we can build on this to go further. We can also look and say, okay, so that's maybe our first read throughs, but if we look at this, who are the actors here? So the police service member is named, and the part of the sheriff's office is named, and the block, the address of the house they closed is named. However, so we're putting like the people that are named are it's police driven, police forward, and we're using language here that talks about a house, not people in a house, not people with addictions, not people who sell drugs or use drugs. We're talking about a house as like a physical object. So what this writing does is it's depersonalized the people on the receiving end of the police action. And so the narrative leads with like a police perspective. It frames this as a much bigger win for the community. And so the message we get here is that this is a good thing. So so we've got a positive outcome. We can continue coding, and I won't for our purposes here, but we could also start looking at, okay, across other articles, are people who use drugs, are they continuously depersonalized or made liminal through these quotes? Because here, people with addictions don't exist. We're talking about physical structures, and the police are people, but the people who might have been in this house are not people. So what does that tell us about who's important in this scenario? What does it tell us about who has power? The police officers here are expressing a sense of pride in this. So are there, elsewhere, are there reflections on what emotions the people in the house might experience? What does the lack of information about their circumstances tell us? Who was maybe interviewed for this article? Like, we could go on, but I'm hoping that this kind of gives an overview. You can start with quite descriptive things like drug house, police action, that kind of thing. But then if you reread the same passage and you're looking for who's involved, whose voice is heard, what emotions are there, who's named, who's not named, where is there depersonalization, is there emphasis on the personalization of a concept, all of these different kinds of things. So that is how you make meaning out of a couple of sentences. And then when you look across, 15 interviews, or in this case, it was about 100 media reports, you can start to see trends and patterns of who is named in all these articles, who is the hero of these articles, what kind of actions are being taken that are resulting in this heroism. And so you can go on, but that is how you identify the pattern to create the story. So if I was looking for experience here, I'd be saying, they closed down the drug house and it resulted in pride and a feeling of satisfaction, a win for the community, a positive public image, and the experience was a good one for the police officers. However, in contrast, the experience for the people in that house is not spoken about here. So why not? If you were looking at grounded theory, you could say, okay, they shut this down and then probably people were displaced. How was that handled? Were they approached before the house was closed down? What does it mean to close the house down? What were the precipitating factors? And that kind of thing. So you go through and over time you build up a series of codes here. You can also start to collapse them on one another. So maybe safety is associated here with police action. So we can start to do some of this. You can also, there's times where you've gotten your codes and now you are trying to go from 30 different codes you've created into a story, maybe into some broader themes. This is the part where qualitative researchers love post-it notes or colored markers or whatever the case may be. And I find that sometimes it's good the software will take you so far, but at that point you need something more flexible, or using a whiteboard or something. So what that does is it enables you to try out different ideas without necessarily messing up what's happening on your digital documentation data management system. So you might write each one of your codes on a post-it note and organize them, and then organize them again a different way, organize them again a different way. Because there are lots of different ways that you can organize your codes and your data. So you can look at barriers and facilitators. You can look at individual organizational and system level factors. You can look at local, provincial, national. Like there's lots of different kind of organizing principles you can use. What you want to do is say which ones are going to help me answer the research question. So maybe barriers and facilitators isn't a useful frame for you. So instead, you try to organize your post-it notes that way, and you're like, this just isn't fitting, because what could be a barrier could also be a facilitator. It's a question of dose. Okay, so maybe we instead want to organize based on individual, group, society, and try and put them that way. So having something tactile can, I find, help get your thoughts going, and it's a little lower stakes than like rearranging your entire online thing. So additionally, while you're doing qualitative analysis, there's also talk of like memos or reflexive writing and that kind of thing. And it's not intended to be a stream of consciousness. It's intended to track your decision making. So what you might write is, I tried to code these data or these codes into themes around the ideas of barriers and facilitators. However, that did not work because there isn't a clear line between what is a barrier and what is a facilitator. So instead, I tried this. That's the kind of thing you write down. Because if you are defending a thesis or something, that is an example you can pull up to say, my work was rigorous because I didn't just stick with the first thing I tried. When I was working with that, I realized that that framework wasn't useful, or I needed to take a different approach. And so when we talk about an audit trail, that is what that information provides you. You might also divide things into barriers and facilitators and say, okay, I've got 3 codes. Like generally this structure works, I've got 3 codes that don't fit anywhere. So now I have to figure out, are those codes not relevant to this pattern? Or am I wrong about how I'm organizing it? And those 3 codes are there to tell me that this structure doesn't work. So you might write that down and say, okay, I'm gonna come back to it tomorrow because I need to just let my brain settle and then work on it another day. So that's how we kind of approach the analysis process. And so hopefully that can provide a little more clarity as to how you go through it. And also there's more than one way to pet a cat. If your supervisors want something different, that doesn't mean to say that it's wrong. It's just saying there's different approaches, especially based on your methodology. You know, some people have really in-depth experience with classic grounded theory, and they have a different approach to the way they do things. So, you know, these are some ideas to offer a starting point. I'd say look for relevant patterns, and then from those patterns, how do you make sense of it in an interpretive level, so that you're going beyond just describing what's happened, and tell us a story that sheds light on our understanding of this process or this experience. And ideally, then we can say, okay, what interventions might be required, or what positive actions might the community take to respond to this? Could we provide more support at some point in this process? Or, you know, are there action items associated with this, especially in health research? And sometimes that might not be the case. Sometimes it's about telling a story that's being unheard or deliberately ignored. And just sharing it is a powerful thing. But either way, you want to look for different things when you're taking different kind of passes through those data, and make sure you're identifying relevant patterns. So my next video will be on how do you write up your findings, and in the meantime, happy coding.